Good afternoon, participants. I'm Yashwendra Singh, Executive Editor of ETCIO, and I welcome you all to this very topical webinar on securing critical information infrastructure. Critical information infrastructure, or CII, is vital for the smooth and secure functioning of information and communication technologies, be it the internet, telecommunications, software, or even satellites. Digitization has accorded even greater priority to CII, given that attacks on such infrastructure impede all associated processes. Moreover, the centrality that data has acquired today means that the safety of data is directly dependent on the safety and reliability of CII. This web session today will throw light at the different factors that affect CII and how it will evolve in the coming years. And to address the various aspects of CII, we have with us an industry expert today. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Manish Tiwari, Global CISO, Bharti Airtel. Manish has more than 30 years of experience in information security and information operations. He is a result-driven cybersecurity professional responsible for various IT security initiatives in the Indian Navy. Prior to joining Bharti Airtel, he was working as Chief Information Security Advisor at Microsoft India. He has been a visiting faculty to Naval War College, Army War College, and various naval institutions as a domain expert on subjects pertaining to cybersecurity. So without any more delay, I would request Mr. Manish to please give his presentation. Over to you, Mr. Manish.
Thank you, Yashwendra. I hope everybody can hear me loud and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. It's a privilege, to be amidst you, even if virtually, and to share some of my thoughts and my experiences. Let me clarify that, notwithstanding the kind words which Yashwendra has used, I don't think anybody in today's time and space and in this world can proclaim to know it all when it comes to technology and particularly in that cybersecurity. So I say that with a lot of responsibility. Having said so, it's been a long journey, and if nothing else, particularly the last 15 years, which have seen a phenomenal amount of transformation in the world of IT and hence IT security, a lot of lessons have been learned, and as we speak, technology is changing at a pace which is phenomenal. So whilst we move ahead, I think it's extremely important that we don't forget the basics. So whilst we look ahead, it is equally important that we keep one eye and part of our vision behind, lest we forget the basic fundamentals of cybersecurity. And in many ways, whilst we will be galloping full ahead, and that is the theme of this presentation and this interaction today, there are some things that I will basically address, which are reflection on the basic cyber hygiene that we need to constantly keep in mind when guarding ourselves, not only as individuals, but when guarding our organizations. So with much further delay, let me start. And at the onset, I would also like to basically add that it's also a privilege for me that I have Vikrant Bhargav, one of my colleagues out here, who will, after some time, a few minutes into the presentation, will actually help showcase as to how automation is transforming network operations and security operations. And in Bharti Airtel, we in any case look at these two very important functions as tightly knit in and integrated. And there is a lot of stuff that, even though due to paucity of time, that he can share will be at high level, but it will be of tremendous amount of, of interest to you all. I am also privileged to have with us today the CEO of one of the, very technical advanced solutions in the market today, which is causing a huge amount of disruption. We have Mr. Chandrasekhar Pandey, who is the CEO of Sekion. He joins us from Boston along with his team, and they are driving a huge amount of disruption in the world of AI-driven security operations. And at some point in time, I will request him to share his his view, and if I may use the word, the Silicon Valley view of how technology is actually disrupting and what is the future that they actually foresee. So what is the cyber threat landscape? Now, folks, I'm sure you in many presentations would have heard all these things oft spoken, and probably got insensitized now, or rather to some of these data points which are thrown as part of practically every presentation. The fact of the matter is that India is one of the top attack countries in the world. We have a lot of issues around prevalence of piracy, and this is something that we share with some of the Southeast Asian countries, and now some countries in Africa which are fast digitizing. And you'll be surprised to know that today one of the most affected countries in the world is Ethiopia, and incidentally it is also a country where there is a massive accelerated movement towards the digital ecosystem, and hence the phenomenal amount of problem that the Ethiopian IT landscape is facing. Notwithstanding all that, India continues to be one of the prime targets in the world, and one of the another reason out here is also the lack of either basic cyber hygiene at the individual or as well as the organizational level. And in many cases, it's also, whilst we move towards implementing fairly complex solutions, we forget the back to basics issues which I talked about earlier. I think all of you can see the data points on your screens. And believe me, going forward, as India, as a nation, becomes more and more dependent on IT through convergence, the impact on our IT fabric is only going to grow manifold. So there is a lot which is happening at the national level, whether it is in terms of policy, whether it is in terms of actual investment by the government. There is a lot which is happening even at the industry level. So one thing I would like to share with you is that cyber incidents cannot be prevented. There will be cyber incidents because in the end it's an interconnected world. The safest network or the safest computer is one which is switched off, filled with cement and dumped into the deepest corner of the ocean. But unfortunately, it is also the most unproductive. So an unproductive system is of no use to anybody. In order to increase productivity, you need to get everyone connected. And unfortunately, that also brings the aspect of cyber threats. So cyber incidents will happen. The question is, how are we prepared to handle these incidents? How well are we prepared to recover from these incidents? How reactive are we in ensuring that we learn the right lessons from these incidents and try to stay half a step ahead of those trying to break into systems? So it's a cat and mouse game. It's a constant learning process. But the aim is how agile we are. And I think the word is agility. And this word this term agility will become even more important as I go further in my presentation. Because if we are not agile, then we will not be able to protect ourselves. The topic of today's conversation is protecting the critical information infrastructure. I will ask a very, I think it's a very free and a frank question that I will pose, which I think everybody can answer to themselves, is, do we really know how to define critical information infrastructure? Do we really know what is the critical information infrastructure? And I ask this question because if we try to protect everything in the ecosystem at the same level, we end up protecting nothing. So one key element or strategy to protecting a critical information infrastructure is to prioritize, to categorize, and be very clear of what is critical to business operations. And hence, you can ensure that the right amount of resources and attention is basically focused on what you define as critical information infrastructure. CII, mind you, would be different for different organizations. You have to define as to what is, whether it is in the government, whether it is in very sensitive networks, or it is in the industry. Industry could be manufacturing, the bank, the BFSI sector, or a service industry, IT, IES, transportation sector, whichever sector. It is for individual organizations and the key people in that organizations to define what is it that could cause disruption to their business operations. And as of today, there is one universal truth, and that is data. Irrespective of which organization that we belong to, whatever genre in the industry that we may belong to, every organization today is data dependent, and every organization's key data is its lifeline, and that needs to be protected. I would, diving a little deeper, I would say that if at a very high level, 5 major priorities for a CIO would be: most of our applications, most of our interfaces are web driven today. We have web portals, and it is extremely essential that this ecosystem, which is the manner in which our customers interact with us, they communicate with us, and even internally within organizations, you basically are driving services which are web driven. We ensure that web security is kept absolutely paramount. Device security, I could divide this into 2 parts. One is basic devices, endpoints, mobile devices, which are in individual hands. And today, in terms of IoT, you have a mushrooming of devices which are coming in the ecosystem. How do you protect that device with inbuilt security as against bolt-on security? And more importantly, how do you secure the communications between that device and your organization's ecosystem? I have already mentioned data security. The weakest link in this entire thing is the end user. I think this is the most repeated fact, and the fact is it is a fact. It is the universal truth that the weakest link in this entire chain is the human. So constantly that we have to ask ourselves as CXOs is, how can I reduce that human element? How can I take that decision without disrupting the efficiency or the productivity of the human, but reduce the possibility of a mistake on his part? And of course, in that we are referring to as our, in today's world, in operations, whether it is business operations, decision making, or even cybersecurity operations, IT operations, we are now seeing the advent of artificial intelligence driven automation in a very big way. Whatever we do, there will always be that element in which the end user remains a weak element, and hence this can only be addressed through endpoint hardening, ensuring that users are educated from time to time, and adopting processes and technologies which basically encourage automation and reduce the possibility of inadvertent or even advertent mistakes on the part of end users. In this last thing, and the most important, is brand security. It is important that we protect our infrastructure, but unfortunately, our brand could get impacted by masqueraders who steal our identity and set up fraudulent services in the brand's name elsewhere. And hence today it's extremely important that we set a process and we set up a procedure and we subscribe to such services which ensure and which help in detection of such brand abuse and basically work to take it down in the fastest manner possible. I think all these things put together, I would say, is the steps that you can do to protect your brand overall. Very quickly, I I would, like to sort of summarize at least what I have said till now in terms of what are today's challenges. So the key challenges is how do you protect the end user? How do you protect the device, including IoT devices? And I'm sure you have seen and heard and read about recent cases where IoT devices that had very little security built into them were used to target their own ISPs, and through a denial of service attack, and turned on the very ISPs which were giving them connectivity, causing massive disruption across North America, and this was sometime early last year. With the advent of mobility in terms of mobile phones, I think the whole scenario has changed in a very, very major way. Today's IT environment is very dependent and very encouraging of applications. These are point applications. These are point applications which do specific functions. They are very efficient. They're designed to do something, and they do that well. And they are designed to run from our mobile phones. They may run from the cloud, and they may be accessible from our mobile phones, or they may be running entirely on mobile phones. We have various Play stores, whether set up by Apple, Microsoft, or Google for Android-supported systems. The fact of the matter is that when we bring in some of these applications into our endpoints, if they are vulnerable, then we end up introducing the vulnerability that they carry, and they basically bring along with themselves. And this has become one of the major concerns in the cyber security world today. In fact, I would say that one of the most infected systems is Android, because it is also the most prevalent in the world. And increasingly, mobile devices are becoming extremely, extremely powerful. And going forward, I think this is security. A complete security of mobile devices is something that end users, as well as organizations which allow access to their sensitive information from individual mobiles, need to consider. Last but not the least, in this case, it is data. Now, I would also like to touch upon the fact that going forward now, the world is adopting the cloud technology in a very, very big way, and I think that is the right way to go. Cloud is the true disruptor. It is increasing productivity, and if you really ask me, organizational data is far more safer on the cloud or in a cloud environment as against individual endpoints. But whilst you can secure cloud by using various solutions, you must understand that endpoint security and its importance does not get diluted, for the simple reason that every endpoint from where cloud infrastructure is accessed, if compromised, can lead to a backdoor and compromise of data on the cloud. So this again is a reminder to what I had said earlier. As we progress forward and we adopt newer and more productive and safer technologies, we must not forget to look back and ensure that some of the basic fundamental issues around cybersecurity hygiene are addressed. In fact, I would encourage you to go onto the internet and search for the shared responsibility model between a cloud service provider and the endpoint user. Sometime back, a very interesting assessment had been done for the Indian IT ecosystem by KPMG. It was a survey which they did, and they came out with a very interesting fact that IT risk assessment is not being carried out in an effective manner in more than 70% of the organizations in the Indian ecosystem. Now, why is this alarming? IT risk assessment is a very, very important part and process of analyzing the maximum possible risks to your IT infrastructure, and to ensure that, look, mitigating controls, or as we call them, compensating controls, are applied, or appropriate technologies are implemented to mitigate those risks. And if for any reason, which could be business requirements, there is something which leads to a gap area, which we refer to as residual risk, that is also addressed through compensating controls. So the whole purpose of an IT risk assessment, which has to be done at least once a year for organizations, because frankly, IT infrastructure is like a breathing animal. It is changing every year. You have transformation happening. You have changes in the IT infrastructure. You have more and more applications being commissioned, or new applications being commissioned, and older ones being sunset. So the whole IT environment of any organization is a constantly changing feature, and hence the risk assessment which is carried out, let's say this year, is not necessarily accurate to give you guidance in the second year, which is why, as part of basic information security processes and hygiene, IT risk assessment should be done and repeated at least once every year. And this is something that organizations need to take more seriously, because this is a proactive measure which can actually help them to beef up the security of their organization. And as they say, as the old adage goes, a stitch in time saves nine.
Thank you, Manish sir, for giving us a lowdown on the cybersecurity landscape and also sharing some interesting statistics with us. Participants, we now have a poll question for you. As you can see on your screen, the question is, do you believe a multi-layer approach to cybersecurity is the way forward to securing your enterprise? There are two options, yes and no. You'll get 30 seconds to choose either of the options. Okay, we have the result of the poll, and participants have overwhelmingly opted for yes. With 97% of the people have said yes, and only 3% have said no. Over to you, Mr. Manish.
Sure, thank you. So continuing what I was saying, and I'm so glad there is a difference of opinion. I would have been worried if the poll would have been 100%, because it is always good to have a perspective. But in this case, I would agree with all the folks who have polled for, and part of the 97%, for the simple reason that there is no silver bullet in the field of cybersecurity. If something were to fail, it should not become a single point of failure. Now, continuing what I was saying is that in the modern world, which is about anytime and anywhere connectivity, it's a constantly connected world, because that's how our productivity goes up. You have multiple kinds of data. You have public data, you have internal data, you have confidential data, and around this is the complexity of, you have to address cybersecurity issues. You have to, in the world of GDPR, and now very soon the Indian privacy law, which is just around the corner, you have data privacy issues to be addressed. In many cases, for companies, you have very strict compliance laws and guidelines to be addressed, and at the same time, you have to be transparent. because one of the key things in security is transparency, at least within the within the organization. Now, with all this, as I said, you could be anywhere. How do you connect to your data? In the philosophy of anywhere at any time connectivity, and yet keep your data safe, irrespective from where you are accessing the data. So whilst I could go on saying that, look, okay, you can implement MDM, you can have containerization, you can implement rights management. I think rather than specific solutions, what is more important is that is the message I'm trying to convey out here is that the operating environment and its complexity is only increasing, and hence this whole aspect of carrying out risk assessment becomes all the more important, because it allows you to passively determine what could be the risks that your organization and your end users in your company could face, and what is it that you need. You can also balance that with business requirements, and hence create the right balance between business requirements and cybersecurity controls. As cybersecurity professionals, I think we have come a long way. As a CISO, and I'm sure many of you will share my my thoughts, is we are no longer looking for products. What we are looking for is solutions. We want people to talk to us whose conversation is more solution based rather than product based. You want solutions which fit in very well into the ecosystem. You want to talk to people who understand your pain points, they understand your requirements, they understand the industry that you belong to, and speak your language rather than theirs. Not an easy task, but eventually, I think the way forward for us as cybersecurity professionals is to look at the larger picture and have a solutions mindset, rather than just a combination of 20 to 30 cybersecurity technologies and controls. The other thing that I want to very briefly touch upon is this new term which is being flashed about so much, and that is zero trust architecture. The zero trust architecture is a terminology, but the composition of the various components of your overall approach to a zero trust architecture are not something which is new. At a very high level, I would like to sum it up by saying that it is by implementing a culture of trusting nothing and no one. You have to inspect everything, whether it is internal or external networks, people, process, technologies. And here, the verticals that would drive zero trust would be: how do you put in controls to effectively manage your users, manage and protect your devices? What is the network architecture that you put into place? How do you ensure application security not only at the time of its commissioning, but during its entire life cycle? And the last two parts is automation and analytics. Now, eventually, both these are highly data driven. So in a zero trust environment, one of the things that definitely will be implemented is you will end up inspecting everything. Now, this means a relook at existing architecture. This means having applications which are able to handle a huge amount of data volume and so on and so forth. And this is where cloud technologies, which are hyperscale, hyper flexible, and hyper secure, also help. Now, automation is key to security strategy. And before we go on to that, I would request Yashwendra and team from ET to do the second poll that they wish to. Please go ahead.
So the poll question, as you can see on your screen, is can automation play the role of a catalyst in enhancing the security stance of an enterprise? Like the previous poll question, you have two options, yes and no, and 30 seconds to answer. Okay, we have the poll results in front of us. 92% of the people have opted for yes and 8% for no. Mr. Manish, over to you.
Thank you so much. In fact, participants, you've actually set the context for the next 2-3 slides for me by answering in yes. And it's always good to have a different perspective. Glad to see that there are 8% who do not agree. And as I said on the previous occasion, it's always good to have differing opinions. In this regard, I would like to moderate this whole statement by saying that there is nothing called 100% automation. So if that makes the 8% any happier, well, in that sense, I'm with you. There is nothing called 100% automation, but there is a lot that can be automated. And analytics is also helping drive and push the bar further. So automation is not just about reduction in manpower. There is much, much more to automation. Automation and deep learning can be used to actually predict attacks. And by doing so, by putting such an effective and proactive mechanism in place, you can actually raise the cost for the attacker to a level where it is simply not worth it for them. It is extremely important, going back to what I had said of looking back, that whilst it's extremely important that internet-facing systems or your perimeter security be looked at with utmost seriousness. Notwithstanding that, I think it is extremely important that security as a layered concept should equally apply to your internal ecosystem as well. Workstation and users, user behavior analytics, which in traditional SIMs, frankly speaking, has not been a very, very effective, has not been extremely effective. But there's a huge amount of transformation which is happening with the predictive use cases can actually help contain cyber incidents in a very big way. Because typically the first thing that happens in the case of a compromise is where user credentials are stolen, in most of the cases, I would say. The whole key is to assume that there is a compromise. So I think that is a key fundamental philosophy, that assume something will fail. And if it does, then what is the mechanism that you put into place and how much of that can be automated so that you can bring in efficiency and immediately make it extremely difficult for an attacker to penetrate multiple layers of defense. Last but not the least, as I had said, assume a worst case scenario. You should have a data protection policy and ensure that critical data in your organization is fully backed up. I just want to flash this slide to give you a sense of how we protect ourselves at Airtel. It's a huge amount of infrastructure. The ecosystem that we cover is substantial, and it also introduces the complexity of not just IT engineering, but also the network on the telecom side. And in that, I would like to share with you that today with convergence, IT convergence, there are IT systems which span across our telecom as well as IT engineering networks. One of the key learnings and one of the key learnings in this entire thing has been that, look, anything which is a standard action, that is a predictable input and has a predictable output, can be automated. The whole aspect of automation is only part of the journey towards AI. Simple automation doesn't require predictive analysis. Simple automation is simply automating routine tasks. And believe me, in security operations, there are a lot of tasks, a lot of incidents on account of which tickets are raised, which are of a fairly routine and predictable nature. So where there's a fixed input and there's a fixed output, believe me, it can be automated, and this can help your your security resources being more optimally utilized for even more important tasks in the security ecosystem. Now, the Airtel MSS SOC that we have set up, and from a trending perspective, as we see going forward, we are seeing the traditional SIM with a bolt-on. Some SIMs have a bolt-on SOAR function. We find that, at least if you ask me as an individual, I find such solutions, less of solutions, but more of a number of products which are cobbled together and don't really do a good job. I think the future is of inbuilt, security products with all inbuilt features. So with inbuilt features as against bolt-on features. So the traditional SIM backed with artificial intelligence engine, SOAR, that is security orchestration, automation and response engine, user behavior analytics, network-based anomaly detection, threat intelligence, which can be fed through multiple sources, intrusion detection system. All this put together can basically ensure a comprehensive cybersecurity in this new era for your critical information infrastructure. What I have in this slide shown across to you is nothing but the traditional sources of alerts and logs, which would further be acted upon by the next gen system. This is another graphical representation of the previous slide, and there is so whilst most of it is a representation in a different manner, one thing that I want to bring your attention is the external enrichment. So asset information, employee information, threat feeds, inputs from various applications, data stores, all this can basically enrich your all the data inputs which are coming into an AI SOC, which is data driven. It's basically, folks, it is data driven. I am now, for the next few minutes, I'm handing over the mic to Vikrant Bhargav, my colleague, who is the architect of the NOC and SOC, autonomous NOC and SOC program, and he'll share a few insights with you. Over to you, Vikrant.
So thank you so much, Manish, and we really appreciate the presence of all the participants as a part of this webinar. So without wasting any time, I'll just explain you in the next few minutes. I'll just explain you a little more details about the automation process, and I'll explain you some of the foundational building blocks that have gone as a part of this transformation. Now, if you see in the screen, the process is extremely simple. There are only 3 steps: detection, remediation, and prevention. Detection is extremely important because unless you detect well, you cannot remediate what is the problem. So first and fundamental starting point of this journey is the right detection technology and right detection processes. Once you move on, then you have to identify that what are the remedial actions for the right detection, and then ultimately you will be able to achieve the prevention state. Now, since we are at this topic, I would like to introduce a concept of integrated NOC and SOC at Airtel. What we very strongly feel is that with the changing technology landscape, the detection mechanisms and the remediation mechanisms for a normal SOC operations and NOC operations are absolutely converging. Both are dependent on data, both are dependent on events, and ultimately the automation playbooks which have to be executed, those are also the same. For example, if there are high number of sessions in the firewall, and you need to kill those firewalls, which is causing this, which might be because of a potential security incident or a non-security incident. But ultimately, the remediation has to be converged between the two processes. Now, if you see on screen, if you see what are the traditional NOC components, traditionally you used to monitor whether my hardware is up or down, my system is up or down, my database is up or down. So traditionally, it was a binary state, whether it is up or whether it is down. But as we move ahead, and as Manish highlighted that we are moving to a more digitized state, what we have realized is that this does not work for us, and primarily because of two reasons. Number one, our service transaction spans across multiple applications and multiple systems. So if a particular system is up or down, what impact it will have on the overall service, that is need to be detected pretty fast, and it cannot be detected in a traditional environment of monitoring the system up or down. Number one. And if I give you the example of that, if you go to a Airtel retailer store and if you buy a SIM card from an Airtel retailer store, when you punch in your details, from the time your SIM gets activated in next 3 to 4 minutes of time, it touches 12 systems in between. So when you walk out of the store, neither the retailer nor the customer is even aware that the transaction is at 12 systems. And if there's any issue with any of the systems, ultimately my SIM cards will not get activated. That's how the complicated service paths have started becoming. The second piece is that it is because of a demand from a customer side. The market response has become extremely fast. A funny fact, but a true fact is what we have realized, that between the best quality alert that we have and the first screenshot on our internal communication groups, there's a difference of 7 minutes. So 7 minutes is technically a race for a NOC and a SOC. If you are able to remediate in 7 minutes, you won the race, you are proactive. If you are not able to remediate in 7 minutes, you lost the race and you are reactive. And that is where there was a need of adding the new age NOC and SOC components, where you said that you will not just monitor the traditional system components, you will monitor the business KPIs. You will not monitor the application performance, you will monitor the user experience. And since there was so much of a data which was being generated from these systems, you moved about a raw logs processing, your capability to process the raw logs that had to be multiplied. And then when these alerts and events are generated at so much volume, a correlation across a service path, both for a NOC incidents as well as SOC incidents, are very, very much important. Firewall utilization is high. That is a IT incident. But what impact is it causing to a particular business service is what matters to us. And that is where the concepts like core auto ticketing, correlation, and service path plays a role. And all of this is being enabled by the fundamental technology at the backend, which is tools like App Dynamics, which goes deep into application performance, ServiceNow, event management, ticket management, and fundamentally the time series databases, which gives you a much more clear insight about your data. And I can very proudly say what differentiates today is our ability to detect cross application dependencies. Something goes wrong, how do we detect it in 7 minutes of time? Our mindset to drive metrics around everything. Numbers, database response times, CPU utilization, memory utilization, metric around everything. And that's how we have transformed it. Now, if I talk specifically about the security operations, we have already touched upon the process of detection, assessment, ticketing, and response. Now, if you're driving the automation of your security operations, there are fundamental two things which you need to ensure. Number one, don't just look at automating what you're doing currently. You have to ensure that it's a combination of process as well as the technology which automates this process. Because if you just blindly automate the process which is already deployed, you will be just eliminating a human in between, but you are not overhauling the process. That's number one. So from our experience, what I can tell you that before you're evaluating any tool, you're evaluating any technology, keep this thing in mind. The second important piece which is which has to be analyzed is that this whole evaluation has to be done from a quantified way. You have to really clearly assess that what percentage of cases are remediated by what process, what percentage of cases are remediated by what steps. And if I tell you from our current assessment and as per our industry surveys which we have done, the ratio for all the organizations is pretty much the same, in the tune of 15 to 20% variance. Firewall 73, most of the security incidents which get generated are remediated, around 70% are remediated at a target security or a network device, which is firewall or a NIPS or a The 8% is done by end users. And what I can very proudly say is that for us, the whole process is 73% autonomous right now. And we target to ensure this, complete this to 100% by March 2020 with no human intervention in between. Briefly touching upon, there's a definite need of adding more and more processing of a data by adding more and more AI capabilities into it. For that, we are building a central data lake, which will further transform our data correlation capabilities. Very briefly touching about the benefits of our automation. First of all, auto remediation of our tickets. I can say that 52% of our tickets are auto remediated at this point of time. That means any event will get generated as a result of these event detection and monitoring tools, 52% gets remediated automatically. Now, since 52% of my failures are remediating automatically in the NOC and SOC space, that will directly lead to number of incidents or number of high outages going down. And that is where we have brought about a close to 90% reduction in the number of outages that we have. And since the remediation is automatic, that means there's no manual intervention in between, the process is simplified. The decrease in the resolution time has also been observed in the tune of 80%. And since all of this is there, you don't need a human in between. We have seen a 85% reduction in the FTAs that used to operate at NOC. So that means with the 3x the volume, now we are working with almost 15% of the original manpower that we have. And that is what the benefits of automation and the process simplification has helped us achieve. With this, I'll quickly hand it over to Manish to further take it forward.
Thank you, Vikrant. Before I go forward, I would request Chandra, if you can hear me, to give your perspective very, very briefly, because we are running hugely short on time. To give your perspective of how AI SIM technologies are actually causing disruption in the field of cybersecurity. Please go ahead if you can hear me.
Thanks, Manish. And as Manish and Vikram talked about, Manish mentioned that his focus is on solution, not on the bringing the different products. And as we started the SecYan, from the get-go, our goal was to deliver comprehensive cybersecurity, and we did not want it to do another Me Too product. So the AI SIM, when we talk about the AI SIM, if you look into it, it consists of already SIM, SOAR, UBA, NBAD, NTA, threat intelligence kind of brought into the platform. It has APIs to bring your additional stuff you want to have local to your own organization, IDS, ML, and AI with the actionable intelligence. And the key about the AI, as Manish pointed out, it's all about having the context and situational awareness. In any organization, as you are dealing with the data sets, as both Manish and Vikram talked about, that data-driven security, that's what you are talking about. So whether you are looking into the application, whether you are looking to the services, user, host, entities, any one of those ones in there, whether inside, outside, all of those things, whether your assets are on the cloud, everything has to be looked into the single context. But at the same time, what is most critical is how you are bringing the situational awareness in the mind, and not looking into just your organization, but bringing the global intelligence through the threat intelligence in there to make a decision whether a particular event, what is happening right now, is it something relevant where you have to go and take actions from the alert point of view, or this is something you want to just continue watching. And the key is not only having the comprehensive visibility, but proactively detecting the threat, because as both of them pointed out, if you cannot proactively detect the threats in a streaming platform in a shorter period of time, which can be real time in the most of the cases, then you have to have a automation driven to go ahead and eliminate, contain that threat, which is really important. And the same time, as Manish emphasized previously there, that the compliance has to be continuous compliance. Compliance is not a one-time thing, and you have to have analytics, you have to have a reporting, but the key is having a solution which offer you continuous compliance. So context And situational awareness is the key to drive your detections. And then compliance, as well as like elimination containments, all of those has to be automated to drive the efficacy as well as efficiency, so that you don't have these cyber crimes which are increasing like at a huge kind of like it's going up to like trillions of dollars business per year now. You want to eliminate, contain those as soon as possible, so you don't have to deal with the breach situations and all that. That's what basically is AI as well as automation brings into the environment. With that, Manish, I will hand over back to you.
Thank you, Chandra. I'm sorry, I wish we could give more time, but we are running short of time. So, folks, what we are doing in Airtel is part of an initiative called Airtel Secure. A lot of these experiences that we just spoke about, we have actually taken it to our Airtel customers. Mindful of the fact that eventually you do need products to implement certain solutions. What we have done is tied up with some of these key players in the market to take some of these disruptive technologies to our customers, whether it is on the product side or it is on the services side. And I just thought I'll share that with you. The recently commissioned SOC that we have set up, which is one of the largest integrated NOC SOCs in Asia, in Manesar, basically works on an AI SIM platform. And this is something, particularly what Vikrant spoke about. This is the experiencing that we are actually taking to our customers. So, with that, I would like to basically conclude my pitch. And Yashwendra, if there are any questions that you've come across, be more than happy to answer that in the time.
Sure, Mr. Manish. Thank you so much for that wonderful, insightful presentation. We've got lots of questions coming in from participants. I'm not sure whether we'll be able to cover all of them, given the paucity of time. But nevertheless, the first question that we have is, what is the top cybersecurity concern business organizations face today?
So very briefly, I would say it is protection of data and business continuity. So if you were talking about organizations on the private in the private ecosystem, it's about business continuity and protection of data. If it is organizations on the government side, I think it's about the concern is around the same. The only key difference between the two is on the government side, particularly sensitive networks, data once lost is gone forever. So there is no commercial connotation attached to data in most of the cases, particularly strategic and sensitive networks. Whereas on the commercial side, the impact could be equally bad, but there could be many other repercussions, particularly around brand, as well as violations around policies and regulatory violations. So I think that is what the priority is for at least for private organizations and government organizations. Yeah.
Sure, Mr. Manish. The next question for you is rogue IT a security threat? And if so, what should be done to address the situation?
Oh, absolutely. Rogue IT systems, applications are a complete no-no in any enterprise network, for the simple reason that they may have been set up without checks and balances, controls, or inbuilt security. And inherently, whatever are the vulnerabilities that they have, they will introduce the same vulnerabilities into the ecosystem. You have many solutions in the market today. You have, but it is not just about solutions. It's about all the three: people, process, technology. To put processes in place, to put technical controls and systems and solutions in place to ensure that rogue systems do not come up, unauthorized systems do not come up. And last but not the least, you educate your employees that the processes that need to be followed, either for commissioning new systems or applications, or server commissioning, or bringing about change management in an authorized manner. Now, just adding to this, as more and more organizations move on to the cloud, and let me reiterate, the world is firstly moving into a hybrid cloud model. So the world is not moving entirely into a cloud model. It's still in the hybrid space. So today, the complexity is twofold. How do you ensure that there are no rogue applications in your on-prem infrastructure? And how do you ensure there are no rogue applications in your cloud-based infrastructure? So the same thing goes, using the right and appropriate technology. So you can adopt cloud, but whilst adopting cloud, you do not adopt security or security solutions on cloud. Then you end up exposing yourself to vulnerabilities. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for that answer, Mr. Manish. The next question is, how does one address vulnerability to third-party applications hosted on the company network?
So very simple answer, zero trust environment and zero trust network, which means that you don't trust anything and anyone blindly. If you have, typically service providers are more afflicted with this problem. You have an infrastructure and you allow third-party users to basically set up their infrastructure, let's say on your cloud-based service. You have to define the baseline security policy. Now, it could be a partner vendor who is working in your environment and is using, in part, their, it could be an endpoint or part of their infrastructure. They have to comply to your security baseline, period. Now, you ensure that through a systematic process, what we refer to as third-party audits, which will audit these such systems from a technology as well as a process. But to sum it up, any infrastructure that operates in your environment has to adhere to your security policy and baselines. And you have to have an effective methodology of checking and ensuring that. Thanks.
Sure. We have time for just one more question. So the final question for you, Mr. Manish, is how does the company need to do? What does the company need to do to ensure IT security moving forward?
So systems and so technology is not static. Technology is evolving, and the pace at which it is evolving today is far faster than it was 5, 10, 15, and 20 years ago. I guess you simply have to change. One of the ways to do that is this constant process of IT risk assessment to ensure that you correctly identify your critical infrastructure, you correctly identify the threats that could be faced by your own changing environment on account of the changing threat landscape, and hence in that comes other additional things of keeping abreast with what is happening, ensuring that your policies and processes are in line and in tune with such an agile and fast changing environment. So your policies have to be relevant, your technical solutions and your processes have to be relevant, and they have to move with times. There is no shorter path. And lastly, if you are adopting third-party services, then you need to ensure that the third-party services that you subscribe to are also adhering to such security baselines which help you, because you may be taking software as a service. So in that sense, in the shared responsibility model, most of the compliance, most of the responsibility for securing that service rests on the service provider. But in the same shared security model, there are some roles and responsibilities that the organization has to do to fulfill to protect its own end of the piece. So good to move with technology, but when you move ahead on technology, you have to be agile and fast enough to move on security technologies and controls as well.
Great. That's all we have time for. With this, we would like to wrap up the webinar. Thank you so much, Mr. Manish, for that comprehensive presentation and those insightful answers. And thank you, participants, for taking time off your busy schedules and participating in this session. Thank you very much once again, and have a wonderful evening ahead.
Thank you so much, all of you, and to the colleagues for joining us. Good evening.